Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another reaction video. This time, how Hitler survived assassination attempts. From what I know, there were many attempts on Adolf Hitler's life, probably the most famous being the July 20th bomb plot, 1944. Also, Georg Elser, who in November of 1939 attempted to assassinate Hitler with a bomb. That the bomb was successful. However, Hitler had left 20 minutes before, and so the bomb did not go off. It's one of the great what ifs of history of what if any of these plots had succeeded, because there was multiple. There was also Maurice Bauer, I think. Maurice Bauer, I think that's his name. He was a Swiss. He believed that Swiss nationality was at stake with Hitler, and so he tried to take him out. And there was also the von Kleist family that had multiple attempts to try and take Hitler out. However, they were never quite able to track his movements. So I'm curious if they're going to go into all these different attempts or if they're just going to focus on one. But this is from the Infographics show. I've never seen one of their videos before, so this is all new for me. Before we get into it, like, comment, subscribe. Thank you all very much for the subscriptions. We're at, I think, 220 right now, and so we're trying to get up to 1,000. Thank you all very much, and let's get right into it.
Here at the Infographics show, we try to brainstorm all kinds of topics.
Just this art style, by the way, is just not it's clashing here with the topic so far.
Think you'll find
Let's
interesting,
see what happens.
but it's even better when we get a great suggestion from our viewers. Viewer Robert suggested we cover the many attempts to assassinate Adolf Hitler. It's quite a story, so Robert, here's the video. July 20th, 1944 was a sweltering day at Germany's Eastern Front headquarters, near the town then known as Rostenburg, East Prussia. Weather is always a factor in war, but even though there was no battle at Rostenburg that day, the unpleasant heat would alter the course of history. Someone made the call that it was too hot to hold the high-level
I'm sorry, this art style is just way too cute for dealing with Adolf Hitler. This is such an adorable, lighthearted art style.
meeting in the concrete bunker within the so-called Wolf's Lair or Wolfschanze. Instead, they would meet in a wooden room with windows. You'd think that the Nazi leadership would be more vulnerable in the less fortified setting, but the change of venue may have saved Adolf Hitler's life, at least for a little while. Today was to be the culmination of an assassination plot by the German resistance, including several high-ranking military officers and civilians, that had been years in the making. Hitler had no idea there was a briefcase containing a bomb underneath the oak table just 2 seats down from him. Neither did anyone else in the room, save the man who placed it there, Lieutenant Colonel Klaus Scheck von Stauffenberg, who excused himself on the pretext of making a phone call. At 12:42 p.m., the bomb went off, and Stauffenberg hurried away to set the rest of the plan in motion. The July plot was only the latest of more than 30 assassination attempts against Hitler, both before and after he'd seized power. The Nazi dictator had literally been dodging bullets left and right. In 1921, an unknown person...
Yeah, so just to comment on the 1944 plot. Not only that, so it was also the heavy wooden table leg that helped take a lot of the blast. Hitler was injured in this. He didn't come out unscathed, although the propaganda wanted you to believe. Well, the propaganda at the time wanted the Germans to believe that he came out unscathed. His legs were very badly damaged. His clothes were obviously destroyed, and he had some shrapnel in his legs. Another thing too is that there was supposed to be 2 bombs in the briefcase. However, I don't remember the events preceding it precisely, but there was actually only 1 placed in there, and it's theorized that extra bomb, had it have been placed in there, that would have been enough to have actually murdered him. And also the coup that was supposed to happen afterwards was not very well thought out. It was very rushed, despite it taking many months of planning. There was a lot of disagreement over who would do what exactly would happen, who would take charge. So it was not a very clear, concrete plan, and it's possible that it might have failed anyways had there been more resistance from the inner Nazi circle. So who knows? But that's just a few comments.
And the crowd took a shot at Hitler as he was speaking. 2 more shooting attempts followed in 1923. The first, also in a crowd. The second, a shot at the car Hitler was in. There were 4 attempts in 1932. The first in January was an attempted poisoning. Others dining with Hitler at Berlin's Hotel Kaiserhof contracted severe food poisoning. Hitler took ill as well, but wasn't as sick as the others, possibly because of his vegetarian diet.
Yeah, so that's interesting. That was actually never proved that it was specifically an attempt to take his life, and no one knows to this day who did it. So interesting.
A few months later, someone fired a shot at the train carriage where Hitler was sitting. In June, a group planned to ambush Hitler's car, but without success. At a speech on July 29th, several people lobbed stones at him, one of which did hit him in the head, but not hard enough to take him.
Okay, is that really an assassination attempt?
In 1933, Karl Luttner, a communist and labor leader, plotted with others to kill Hitler by planting a bomb. The day before the election of March 5th, which brought Hitler to power, he was to deliver a public speech, and Luttner intended to use the opportunity to assassinate the Nazi leader before it was too late. But the authorities in what was still the Democratic Weimar Republic found out about the plan and arrested Luttner and his collaborators. Later that year, a separate group, never identified, dug a tunnel underneath a church in Potsdam where Hitler was scheduled to speak, accompanied by other Nazi leaders. Presumably, the tunnel would have been used to plant explosives had security forces not discovered it. As Hitler tightened his strangle...
Fascinating. And you know, it comes to the what-if scenarios, but I think a lot of the assassination attempts were before the war. And it looks like before the war, general everyday people were trying, well, everyday, political actors were attempting to take his life, but then after the war, it really only came down to the inner circle, which was sort of not the inner circle, the Wehrmacht and the people in positions of power that were really the only people that could have gotten that close, because the Gestapo and the SS were just so they just had such a tight grip on society. So it's the chances of it happening, I suppose, got slimmer and slimmer over time.
Hold over the German government, members of the right wing outside the Nazi circle also began to plot against him. Helmuth Mittlus, head of the radical middle-class party, joined forces with the retired Navy captain Hermann Ehrhardt to recruit 150 collaborators to infiltrate the SS. The plan was uncovered by the Gestapo, and most of the conspirators faced severe punishment. A few avoided discovery and remained in the army to continue the internal resistance. The Night of the Long Knives was a deadly purge of the SA, the Nazis' original core group, which was being sidelined in favor of the elite subgroup, the SS. Otto Strausser,
Well, kind of. Mind you, the SA had wanted to replace the army. And that's what they had thought that they would do, is that they would sort of overtake the military, like the traditional German military. And the SS definitely had their influence grow, and there was obviously some battles between the SA and the SS, but it wasn't just the SS wanted to take over the SA. There was also the issue of the army. And a lot of members in the SA too, they were the old socialist types. And what I mean by socialist, because this is, I don't know why, but this is still a debated issue. They were very anti-capitalist, they were anti-communist. And so they were sort of this ideology of they felt that Hitler had betrayed them by leaning more into big business, right? And that was some of the people in the older party that had been long-term SA members that saw their influence sort of dwindle and dwindle as time went on.
This affected former Nazi whose brother was killed in the Night of the Long Knives, led other German exiles in Prague in the anti-Nazi Black Front. They carried out an unknown number of assassination attempts in the late 1930s. Joseph Goebbels named Strasser Germany's public enemy #1. In 1938, the military intelligence chief Major General Hans Oster, along with several other military leaders, conspired to arrest Hitler if he reneged on his commitment not to invade Western Czechoslovakia, which the Nazis called the Sudetenland. They were counting
Sudetenland or whatever
on British support for this action, which they intended as a prelude to the reinstatement of Kaiser Wilhelm II. But when British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain acceded to Hitler's annexation of the Sudetenland, the conspirators lost their opportunity, and instead of coming across as an illegal warmonger, Hitler gained popular support in the German public. Members of the Oster plot would also continue as part of a secret resistance. So
that too. So not even just to talk about Czechoslovakia, but also the invasion, I suppose, the breaking of the treaties of Versailles and Rhineland. If the French had have went and actually proceeded forward and actually fought the Germans there, even if there was any contact made, the Germans had explicit instructions to actually retreat, right? And you got to think that if there just had been some boldness there, right, it would have been completely embarrassing for Hitler at this time. And I think that appeasement of Czechoslovakia, although it's a very contentious issue, there are some arguments for appeasement, especially in 1938. But I think 1936, just if they had known, right? If they had known, just what would have changed.
In 1938, Maurice Bavaud, a Swiss national who held the bizarre belief that killing the Fuhrer would also somehow bring down the Soviet government and restore Russia's Romanov dynasty, launched a one-man operation.
I didn't know that.
He planned to gun down the dictator at a party in Munich, celebrating the anniversary of the Beer Hall Putsch, the Nazis' failed attempt to seize power in 1923. But he couldn't get a clear shot, and since he didn't want anyone else to die, he didn't fire. Bavaud then traveled to Berchtesgaden, where he hoped that forged documents might get him closer to his target. He learned that Hitler was still in Munich, so Bavaud tried to make his way back by train. He was arrested and confessed under interrogation by the Gestapo. Like several other would-be assassins, Bavaud was executed by guillotine.
But then how did they know that he planned to assassinate Hitler? Okay.
The following year,
maybe you guys can help me out on that one in the comments.
The carpenter George Elser skillfully hid a bomb inside a wooden pillar ahead of time for the Beer Hall Putsch anniversary and set it to go off at the customary time of the observance. But Hitler rushed for time, started and ended early, and was gone by the time the bomb exploded. Elser was caught, but the Gestapo kept him alive until almost the end of the war, believing that he must have been part of a conspiracy. If so, he didn't talk.
Well, and even then, that is true, but they also wanted to put him on trial. They wanted to make a big show trial. Goebbels specifically wanted to make a big show trial, but by the end of 1944, the writing was on the wall for Nazi Germany overall, and I think they just shot him.
The number of upper-level military leaders in the Wehrmacht with grievances against the Führer grew. Henning von Treschkow, part of the leadership in the German campaign against Russia, became the ringleader for Project Valkyrie, an elaborate plan to replace all of the Nazi leadership loyal to Hitler upon completion of an assassination. Following the fall of Stalingrad, Hitler paid a visit to the site in western Russia. Coup plotters considered simply shooting him while he was there, but that action was called off, in part because Himmler wasn't present. But there was a second strike in motion that went ahead. Treschkow asked Lieutenant Colonel Heinz Brandt, who would be flying with Hitler back to the headquarters in East Prussia, if he'd deliver a bottle of liqueur to a colleague. Brandt put the bottle in his luggage, unaware that it was a disguised bomb, which was timed to explode when the plane was over Minsk. But the bomb malfunctioned in the cold cargo hold. Learning that the plane had landed intact, Treschkow dispatched an aide to retrieve the bomb before it could be found out. In another attempt. And
the bomb specifically, it was not one of these like cartoony, things with wires or something like this, with a timer on it. It was a cap and fuse one. So, and I might get this wrong, so don't take my word on this 100%. But basically, it's this material that dwindles down slowly, and when it finally reaches the strike point, it blows up. Right, and I think it's a British invention actually. I think it was of a British make, and because it was so cold, the material didn't dwindle down. Right, eventually reaching the striking point, because it was placed in the cargo hold. But if it had been on the carry-on, it would have exploded.
Hitler, along with Himmler and Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, were
Hermann Göring. Oh boy.
Reviewing new winter uniforms. The handsome officer, Axel von den Busche, who was to serve as model, volunteered for the suicide mission to wear a bomb under the overcoat. But the planned meeting was delayed. The conspirators continued seeking a chance to kill all three leaders at a stroke. In the end, Stauffenberg was the only conspirator who could get close enough to the increasingly wary Führer, who by now had decided it was a good idea to wear a bulletproof vest. A veteran of both the African and Russian campaigns, Stauffenberg had lost a hand and an eye in battle. He was to carry out the assassination, but many others now were involved in another key aspect of the plan, which required a military coup by the German Reserve Army.
And one of the few officers one of the few Nazi officials who was awarded afterwards for their bravery for standing up, although this was obviously posthumous. How do you say that word? Anyways, it was after his death.
And I believe that even the nation of Israel actually gave him an award, Wow, okay, that's embarrassing. But oh well, I'll figure out, by the next reaction video, I'll figure out how to say that word. Anyways, and there was a few other officials that were given for their resistance. But he's quite a fascinating character, actually. He somehow shows up in a lot of fictionalized TV shows too. There's a TV show called Charité at War, which I would highly recommend. And he's somehow makes his way into the plot, and he's sort of scheming with Sauerpuck, who was one of the main doctors, who is a real person at the Charité in Berlin. So cool show, highly recommend. Check it out if you can. It's a German show, but you can probably watch it where you're located with English subtitles.
Plotters in Berlin would use the assassination as a false flag operation, accusing the Nazi leadership of taking out Hitler themselves, providing a pretext for the overthrow, after which they would sue for peace and restore civilian government and the rule of law. But first, they had to kill the man who had led Germany down the ruinous path of war.
Right, and it wasn't just that too, but there was the big issue of what to do about the Soviets. Right. So there was obviously some debate within that inner circle of there were some ideas thrown around of surrendering to the West and trying to get the West to fight against the Soviets. There was a lot of contentious debate that wasn't really quite settled on. However, the one thing that they knew they had to do was take out Adolf Hitler.
Friedrich Fromm, the Reserve Army's commander-in-chief, had agreed to turn a blind eye to the actions of the conspirators, but he appointed Stauffenberg as his chief of staff, enabling close access to Hitler during meetings. Without understanding the new subordinates' intentions, Stauffenberg was to carry a British-built briefcase bomb to the meeting at the Wolf's Lair. It was equipped with 2 explosive devices. After arriving at the fortress, Stauffenberg ducked away, saying he needed to change his shirt. But interruptions prevented him from arming both devices. He went ahead with the single bomb, though. The physics of a wooden porous room would make for a less deadly blast than the one that was sealed in concrete.
The concrete.
So Stauffenberg made sure to sit as close to Hitler as he could, just 1 seat over. But this wasn't to be a suicide mission. After placing the briefcase under the table as close as he could manage, Stauffenberg slipped out. But once the spot at the table was empty, a colonel came to fill it, wanting a closer look at the maps being reviewed. Unknowingly, he kicked the briefcase behind a table leg. When the bomb went off, that made the difference. 1 person was killed instantly. 3 others later died of their injuries. Hitler was wounded. He suffered temporary paralysis and a dislocated arm. His buttocks were bruised and he had a broken eardrum. His pants were torn to shreds and his hair was a mess. But he lived, and that message was relayed to Berlin, preventing the coup. Hitler, who was now boasted of being immortal, gave the order that the conspirators should die like animals. They were
Yeah, and he believed that he had Providence on his side. This was something that he had mentioned before, but the 1944 plot really cemented his idea that, he had God on his side, he had Providence on his side, and that this was destiny, right? This was fate for him to lead. And it just really entrenched him and made him more paranoid than ever before.
Hanged with meat hooks and piano wire. One
brutal way to die, by the way.
Account describes a prolonged torture, with the condemned repeatedly taken to the edge of death and then revived. The following year, the nightmare of the Nazi rule would end with the Soviet capture of Berlin, and Hitler would become his own last victim, shooting himself in the head rather than face justice for his crimes. In the early post-war years, German public opinion remained hostile to the conspirators in Operation Valkyrie, with most people considering them traitors. Meanwhile, following the Nuremberg trials, many rank-and-file Nazis received amnesty from the West German government. It took time, but Germans did come to confront their complicity in Nazi atrocities, and the view of the German resistance began to change. In the early 21st century, only a small minority of Germans polled held negative views of the resistance, who are now officially memorialized. Perhaps the greatest symbol of respect for the resistance fighters comes in a ceremony every year, when new recruits to the German military are sworn in on July 20th. Are there any other moments in history you
Fascinating. I did not know that about being sworn in on July 20th. That must be, or is it maybe it's the recruits that happen to be sworn in on July 20th. Anyways, that was a cool video. So it's one of the big what ifs of history. What if? What if? And maybe our friend What If Altist can help us out in one of these videos. That's going to be it for me today. Thank you all very much for joining. Remember, like, comment, subscribe, all that. If you have any reaction videos you want to suggest,
join the Discord, go to the reaction video suggestions, and put them in there, because that's where I check them all, because it's hard to keep track of YouTube comments. So that's where they all are. Thank you very much. Take care, guys. Have a great day. Bye-bye.